Trump just made a confession in court so explosive, the entire room froze. And when you hear it, you'll understand why judges, lawyers, and even his own allies are in full-blown panic mode tonight. The man who spent years screaming, "I did nothing wrong," has now admitted his January 6th actions may have crossed constitutional lines. And that single admission is already being weaponized against him. This isn't spin. This isn't media hype. This is Trump's own words, now part of the official record, detonating inside a courtroom that's erupting in chaos. And if what he just confessed holds up, it could trigger a constitutional meltdown unlike anything in modern history.
Now it is up to Congress to confront this egregious assault on our democracy. And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them.
You know, we've gotten so used to Trump chaos that even genuinely historic moments can feel like just another headline. But what we're talking about here is not normal. A former president of the United States, through his own legal filings and statements, tied himself to language that basically says, yeah, what I did around January 6th may have violated the Constitution. That's not a stray tweet. That's not some random rant at a rally. That's an admission weaving its way into the legal record. And once it's there, it stops being pure politics and starts becoming evidence. For years, Trump's shield has been simple. I did nothing wrong. Total exoneration. Perfect call. Completely appropriate. He says it so often that his supporters almost chant it with him. But in the legal world, you don't get to just manifest innocence by saying it over and over. The question is always, what did you actually do? And what did you know when you did it? That's why this confession, this acknowledgement about testing constitutional limits, is such a big deal. It goes directly to the thing lawyers care most about, intent. Was he acting in good faith, or did he know that he was pushing past constitutional boundaries and just didn't care?
But let's take a look now at another portion of this documentary from Alex Holder. It's an interview with Donald Trump. This is after the insurrection. This is in March 2021 at his Florida home, Mar-a-Lago.
Can we talk for a minute about January 6th?
Yeah.
Let's go back to January 6th for a second, because that's the core of all of this. Trump stands at the ellipse, looks out at a crowd he has spent weeks feeding lies about a stolen election, and tells them, now it is up to Congress. We're going to walk down to the Capitol. That is the President of the United States, not some random guy on a street corner. He knows exactly where Congress is, exactly what Congress is doing, and exactly how furious these people are, because he worked them up. His defenders have always tried to sanitize that moment. Oh, he meant it metaphorically. Oh, he told them to be peaceful. Oh, he was just exercising free speech. Fine, let's accept for the sake of argument that this is their story. Their escape hatch has always been. Trump believed the election was stolen, so in his mind, he was defending democracy, not attacking it. In other words, maybe his actions were extreme, but he didn't know they were unconstitutional. He thought he was the hero of the movie, not the villain. And then comes this admission. This language acknowledging that his conduct tested constitutional limits and may have crossed the line. That is not the language of a man who thinks he was just calmly following the rules. That is someone recognizing there were rules, seeing the line, and charging ahead anyway. This is where the legal side becomes brutal. In court, one of the hardest things to prove is what's happening inside someone's head. Did they intend to commit a crime? Did they knowingly violate the Constitution? You don't get a neat little printout of their thoughts. You infer it from behavior, from patterns, from contradictions. But when the person or their legal team, with their authorization, puts into the record, yes, we were aware that we were testing the Constitution and may have broken it, that changes the game. You no longer have to convince a judge that Trump should have known better. You can point to the fact that Trump's own side effectively says, yeah, we knew we were dancing on the edge of unconstitutionality. That's why confessions and admissions are so powerful. They don't just sit next to the other evidence, they amplify it. Suddenly, every phone call, every memo, every tweet is being read in the light of someone who knew the constitutional danger and plowed forward anyway. Now layer the 14th Amendment on top of this. Section 3 was written after the Civil War, when the country had to deal with former officials who swore an oath to the Constitution and then joined an insurrection to overthrow it. The framers of that section didn't say, please don't do that again. They wrote a ban. If you take an oath and then engage in insurrection or rebellion, or give aid or comfort to those who do, you are disqualified from office. Period. For a long time, that section was basically dormant. People assumed it was a relic. Then January 6th happened, and suddenly that dusty little clause in the 14th Amendment started looking very relevant again. The debate has always been, does what Trump did legally qualify as insurrection or rebellion? And more specifically, did he engage in it, or did he just create the conditions for it? Did he give aid or comfort to people trying to overturn the constitutional order? That's already a heavy conversation, but Trump's admission adds an extra layer. Not only did he encourage actions that undermined the transfer of power, he also understood that what he was doing was constitutionally dangerous. That's the part his defenders can't spin away. You can't keep saying he honestly thought this was totally fine when he's on record acknowledging that it might not be. Think about what it means for a judge to read that language. Judges are not pundits. They are not supposed to be vibing on how they feel about Trump on a given day. Their job is to look at text, precedent, and evidence. So when they look at Section 3, no person shall hold any office who, having previously taken an oath, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion or given aid or comfort. And then they look at Trump's conduct, plus his own admission about likely violating the Constitution. They are forced into a moment of clarity. Either the Constitution means what it says for him, or it doesn't. And that is the real constitutional crisis here. Not just that Trump may be disqualified, but that the system has to decide whether it is willing to enforce that disqualification on someone at his level of power and influence. We've enforced laws on obscure officials and rioters and random citizens. The question now is, does that principle scale up to a former president? If the answer is no, if we find ways to explain it away, delay it to death, or treat the 14th Amendment like a suggestion rather than binding law, then we've quietly created a two-tier system, one constitution for ordinary people and a softer, optional one for presidents who break it on live TV. It's also important to understand how this confession echoes across all of Trump's legal problems. It's not confined to one courtroom or one specific case. Once those words are in the record, any prosecutor, any plaintiff, any congressional investigator can cite them as proof that Trump understood the constitutional stakes. If there's a civil case about the harm caused on January 6th, that admission will be there. If there's a criminal case about attempts to overturn the election, that admission will be there. If Congress ever holds serious, sustained hearings on his efforts to stay in power, that admission will be there. It becomes a Swiss Army knife of evidence, one tool that can be opened and used in half a dozen different contexts. And Trump can't just shrug and say, fake news, because this isn't a chyron on cable. This is language attached to legal filings, to sworn proceedings, to a process where lying and improvising have consequences. Now let's talk politics, because this isn't only about law. This is about power and narrative. Trump's whole political persona is built on never apologizing, never conceding, never admitting weakness. His base loves that about him. They see it as strength, as authenticity. When he says, "I did nothing wrong," it's not just a claim about facts. It's an identity marker. They're not just defending his actions. They're defending the idea of him as the infallible fighter. So what happens when the legal reality cuts directly across that image? What happens when the man who always insists he's the victim of witch hunts is on paper, tied to language that sounds a lot like, "Yeah, my actions may have been unconstitutional"? Some people in his base will rationalize it. They'll say his lawyers overstepped. They'll say he was forced into that wording. They'll claim it's being misinterpreted. The MAGA media ecosystem will come up with a dozen excuses. That's predictable. But there's always a group in the middle, people who might lean conservative, who might even have voted for Trump, who don't live inside that information bubble 24/7. For them, this isn't noise. This is a simple, jarring fact. The guy who kept telling you he did nothing wrong is now associated with a legal admission that suggests the opposite. You can't keep calling January 6th totally legal when the person at the center of it is acknowledging it wasn't. And then there's Congress, stuck exactly where they didn't want to be, in the bright light of a constitutional decision they can't dodge forever. Lawmakers have tried every possible path to avoid taking a real stand on Trump. Some condemned his words, but not his actions. Some condemned his actions, but claimed the system had moved on. Some just pretended that the attack on the Capitol was a tourist visit gone slightly off script. Anything to avoid directly answering the question, does this man's behavior disqualify him from power? Trump's confession makes that question harder to duck. If a court eventually concludes that he engaged in insurrection or violated the Constitution, Congress can't just shrug. The 14th Amendment has a mechanism that allows them to lift disqualification with a 2/3 vote in each chamber. That means at some point, they may face a binary choice: uphold the disqualification or override it on Trump's behalf. That is the last place most politicians want to be. They don't want to be on record as the person who said, "Yes, I'm fine with setting aside the Constitution's ban on insurrectionists in order to help Donald Trump." But they also don't want to be on record as the Republican who voted, in effect, to block Trump from office. Trump's admission tightens that vice. It forces the issue out of the haze and into a yes or no reality. And for the rest of us, this moment is a stress test of everything we say we believe about democracy. We like to tell ourselves that America is a nation of laws, that the Constitution is our North Star, that no one is above the rules. It sounds great in speeches. It looks great in textbooks. But those words don't mean much if, when the crunch comes, we decide they're just decorations. A president encouraging an assault on the peaceful transfer of power is already a line-crossing event. A president or his legal team then acknowledging that his efforts may have violated the Constitution is like putting a spotlight on that line and spray painting "yes, this" over it. The question becomes brutally simple. Do we treat that as a red line or as another shrug moment? Do we say, this is exactly what the 14th Amendment was written for? Or do we say, well, the Constitution is important, but not that important when it might upset a base of voters? Because if the answer is the latter, we're not just normalizing Trump. We're rewriting the job description of the presidency. We're quietly changing it from guardian of the Constitution to person who can ignore the Constitution as long as their party is scared of their followers. Here's the core through line: accountability versus impunity. Accountability means that even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's divisive, even when it hits someone powerful, the rules still apply. Impunity is the opposite. It's when power becomes a shield that bends law out of shape. And the Trump era, more than anything, has been a years-long tug of war between those two forces. This confession, this admission about testing and possibly violating the Constitution, is another pull on that rope. It hands everyone in the system a new piece of leverage. Judges can use it, prosecutors can use it, members of Congress can use it, voters can use it. The only real question is, will they? Will courts say, we have what we need, the text is clear, we're going to enforce it? Will Congress find the courage to stand on the side of the Constitution instead of hiding in procedural excuses? Will enough voters finally see that this isn't about left versus right? It's about whether the document that's supposed to restrain all presidents actually restrains this one. Trump has spent his entire public life treating rules as suggestions, ethics rules, norms. Guardrails, those were always things for other people. But the Constitution was supposed to be different. That was supposed to be the thing that couldn't be bent for one man. Now we're in a moment where his own words, his own legal position, are being used to argue that he went too far even for that. And if we blink here, if the system shrugs this off, we're not just letting Trump skate. We're rewriting what's acceptable for whoever comes after him. Because if Trump can admit that his actions may have been unconstitutional and still face no real constitutional consequence, guess what? The next person is going to push even harder. The line will move again, and before long, the idea of a peaceful transfer of power will feel optional instead of sacred. So yeah, this confession matters. It matters legally. It matters politically. It matters historically. It matters because it destroys the myth of total innocence Trump has been selling since 2020. It matters because it gives courts and Congress a concrete, on-the-record basis to say, you knew what you were doing. It matters because it turns January 6th from a difference of opinion in the eyes of his defenders into what it always was, a calculated attempt to cling to power, even if it meant breaking the very document he swore to protect. And it matters because it forces every institution in this country to answer one simple, brutal question. When a president admits he may have violated the Constitution to stay in power, do we act on that or do we look away? That answer will tell us a lot more about the health of American democracy than any speech, any slogan, or any campaign ad ever could.